The wind was not a whistle. It was a scream. It came down from the north like a freight train loaded with ice, carrying a whiteout so thick it erased the line between the earth and the gray, bruised sky. This was the high plains of Wyoming, a place that did not suffer fools and barely tolerated the stubborn. Calvin Walker was stubborn. He leaned his weight against the lean-to door, forcing it shut against the gale. The wood groaned. His small herd of longhorns, bunched up tight against the windbreak on the south side, were just dark, humped shapes beneath coats of new snow. They would be fine. They were built for this. He was not sure he was. His homestead was a single cabin, a small barn, and a patch of land that only God seemed to have any interest in. It was 40 miles to the nearest settlement that called itself a town, and Cal liked it that way. The isolation was a blanket he had pulled over his own head years ago, and he had not yet found a reason to take it off. He pulled his collar tighter. The sun was a pale smear somewhere behind the gray, and it would be dark in an hour. He had to check the fence line near the creek, make sure a drift had not taken it down. It was a fool's errand in a blizzard, but it was a task, and tasks were what kept a man sane when the world went white and silent, save for the wind. He saddled his horse, a stoic gray gelding that flattened its ears at the first sting of the storm. Cal swung up, keeping his head down, and pushed the horse into the blinding swirl. He rode the line, his eyes stinging, seeing nothing but posts that appeared like ghosts and vanished again. He was thinking of coffee, of the fire, of the dull, comforting ache of wood smoke in his lungs. That is when he saw the shape. It was wrong. It was not a deer, and it was not a calf. It was too small, too low to the ground, and it was moving with the staggering, jerky motions of a broken thing. Cal pulled his horse up. He squinted into the white. The shape fell. It did not get up. He urged the gelding forward, his hand moving to the rifle in his scabbard not out of fear, but habit. The world was full of predators. He got closer, and the shape resolved itself. It was a person. He dismounted, the snow already past his knees, and plunged toward it. The person was on their hands and knees, trying to crawl. He reached them, and his breath caught. It was a woman. She was wearing a dress so thin it might as well have been paper, soaked through and frozen stiff in places. Her hair was matted with ice, but it was her feet that stopped his heart for a second. They were bare. They were blue-black, raw, and bleeding. She was stumbling, somehow, through a blizzard in the Wyoming high country, barefoot. She looked up at him as he approached. Her eyes were wide, vacant with fever or terror, or both. She did not make a sound. She only lifted one hand, a gesture that might have been a plea. And then she fell forward, unconscious, into the drift. Cal did not hesitate. He was a man of long silences, but his actions were swift. He scooped her up. She weighed nothing. He could feel the brittle, shocking cold of her skin even through his gloves and coat. He carried her back to the horse, draped her over the saddle, and mounted behind her, holding her tight against his chest to shield her from the worst of the wind. The ride back was short, but it felt like a lifetime. He didn't try to speak to her. He just held on, the gelding plodding surely through the deepening snow, its head low. He half-dragged, half-carried her onto the small porch, fumbling with the latch with frozen fingers. The cabin door swung open, spilling the warm, yellow light of his lantern onto the snow. He carried her inside and laid her down on the bearskin rug in front of the hearth, as close to the fire as he dared. For a long moment, he just stared. She was young, maybe 20. Her face was gaunt, with a bruise high on her cheekbone that was turning a sickening yellow purple. Her lips were split and pale. He moved. He stirred the fire, adding 2 more logs until it roared. He filled a kettle and set it on the hook. He went to his trunk and pulled out his thickest wool shirt and a pair of long winter underdrawers. They would be far too large, but they were dry, and they were warm. He knelt beside her. "Ma'am," he said, His voice was rough from disuse. She did not stir. Her breathing was a shallow, wet rattle. He could not put dry clothes on a half-frozen, wet woman. He turned his back to her, a gesture of respect he was not even sure she could see, and grabbed a knife. He cut the laces of her bodice from behind, the frozen fabric resisting the blade. He cut the dress and the thin shift beneath it away from her, pulling the frigid, damp rags off her limbs. He did not look, not really. He saw the sharp angle of her ribs, the blue tinge of her skin, and he saw something else, something he tried to ignore, but could not. A geography of pain across her back, raised lines, old and new, some scabbed, some healed to a pale white. He swallowed, hard, and quickly covered her with a heavy wool blanket. He chafed her hands and her ruined feet, rubbing as hard as he dared, trying to bring the life back into them. He wrapped her feet in clean rags. When the kettle whistled, he took a mug, spooned some dried broth mix into it, and added the steaming water. He propped her head up. "Ma'am, you need to drink this." Her eyes fluttered. They were a deep, dark blue, the color of a lake before a storm. They focused, slowly, on his face. Fear flashed in them, stark and pure. She tried to scramble back, but she was too weak. "Easy," Cal said, holding the mug out. "You're safe. You're just cold. Drink." She stared at the mug, then at him. Her body was racked with a shudder so violent it seemed it might break her. Slowly, she lifted a trembling hand and took the cup. She drank, swallowing the hot broth in greedy, desperate gulps. When it was gone, she leaned back, her eyes closing. "I have dry clothes," Cal said, his voice low. "I left them there." He pointed to the bundle beside her. "I'll be outside, tending the stock." He did not wait for an answer. He pulled on his coat and went back into the blizzard, leaving her alone with the fire. He stayed in the barn for a long time, brushing the gelding, checking the store of hay, doing tasks that did not need doing. He was giving her time, giving himself time. When he finally returned, the wet dress was gone, and she was huddled in his clothes, which swallowed her whole. She was sitting up, knees drawn to her chest, staring into the flames. She looked like a lost child. He moved quietly, shedding his snow-covered coat and hanging it by the door. He did not speak, just went to the stove to start supper. He cut salt pork into a pan. The sizzle and pop was the only sound, comforting and normal. "I won't be a bother," she said. Her voice was a dry rasp, barely a whisper. Cal stopped, his back to her. "I'll be gone by morning. I needed a place to rest. The Storm's not letting up," Cal said, not turning. "And you're in no state to travel." "I'll be gone," she repeated, a hard edge in the whisper. He turned and looked at her. She met his gaze. Her eyes were not vacant anymore. They were watchful, hunted. "What's your name, ma'am?" She hesitated. "May? May?" "Just May." He nodded. He had known men who went by one name. It was usually because they were running from another. He pushed a plate of pork and beans toward her. She ate, slowly at first, then with the same desperate hunger she had shown with the broth. He ate his own meal standing by the stove. The cabin was small, and her presence seemed to fill every corner of it. It had been years since anyone, let alone a woman, had been inside these walls. The silence stretched, filled only by the wind and the crackle of the fire. He sat in his one chair, cleaning his rifle, a task that was as familiar as breathing. He could feel her watching him. He could see her from the corner of his eye, her small hands wrapped around the warm mug, her body tense. He kept his motions slow. He was used to horses, and she had the same look as a horse that had been badly beaten, waiting for the next blow, ready to bolt at any sound. He finished with the rifle and set it back on its pegs. The silence in the cabin grew heavier. The storm outside seemed to find every crack in the logs, moaning and pressing in. He thought of another night, another storm of a different kind. He had been younger, foolisher. He had believed in things like town and neighbors and justice. He had believed in them right up to the moment he saw the torches. Cal had not been built like his brother. Elias was bright, full of talk and laughter, the kind of man who could charm a bird from a tree and a skirt off a dance hall girl. Cal was the shadow, the quiet one. But when the riders had come for Elias, accusing him of stealing cattle from the big rancher, Cal had been the one who stood in the doorway. He saw the memory as if it were branded on the inside of his eyelids, the flicker of the torches on angry, whiskey-flushed faces, the coil of rope in a man's hand. "He ain't done it," Cal had said, his voice level, though his heart was a drum against his ribs. "He was with me. We was mending fence on the South Range." "Get out of the way, Walker." One of them, a man named Brody, had sneered. "Your brother's a thief, and we know how to handle thieves. You'll have to go through me." They had not shot him, but 3 of them had pulled him down and held his face in the dirt. He had heard Elias shouting, heard the splintering of the door, heard the sound of a fist hitting flesh. He had fought, bucked, and bit, but they were too many. They dragged Elias out into the night, toward the big cottonwood by the creek. "No," Cal had roared, tasting dirt and blood. "He's innocent, you cowards!" He had gotten free, scrambling to his feet, grabbing a fence post. He had run at them, swinging, but someone had brought a pistol butt down on the back of his head. When he woke, it was morning. The birds were singing, the mob was gone, and his brother, Elias, was hanging still and dark against the pale sunrise. Cal had cut him down. He had buried him, and then he had packed his wagon, sold his land for pennies, and ridden west until he ran out of country. He built this cabin with his own 2 hands, on land that was too high, too cold, and too far from anyone else. He had not spoken to another soul for the first year. In the 8 years since, he had only spoken to the men he drove cattle with, and then only in grunts and short sentences about the weather and the price of beef. He had divorced himself from the world of men. He had found it lacking. A small sound pulled him from the memory. He looked at May. She was still sitting by the fire, but her eyes were closed. She had drifted off, her body finally succumbing to warmth and exhaustion. But it was a fitful sleep. Her hands were clenched in the blanket. He banked the fire for the night. The cabin grew darker. He had 1 bed, a simple cot built into the far wall. The floor was hard, cold, and drafty. He looked at her. He could not, in good conscience, let her sleep on the floor, not in her condition, not with her feet. He touched her shoulder, gently. Her eyes snapped open, and for a second, there was no fear, only a cold, sharp blade of absolute fury. Her hand, which had been hidden under the blanket, moved with snake-like speed. He did not see what she was reaching for, but he recognized the motion. "Easy," he said again, holding his hands up, palms out. "I ain't gonna hurt you." The fury vanished, replaced by a wave of shame and terror. She pulled her hand back under the blanket. "I'm sorry." "It's all right," he said. He had been right. She was a horse that bit. She looked around the small, 1-room cabin. Her eyes landed on the single cot, then on the cold floor. The unspoken question hung in the air. She would not ask for more. She had been given warmth and food, and it was more than she had expected. But the fight was gone from her, and she was so tired he could see it vibrating in her bones. She swallowed, her voice so quiet he had to lean in to hear her over the wind. "Where will I sleep?" Cal looked at the fire, at the floor, at the cot. He was a man who had built a fortress around himself. He had not shared his space, his food, or his fire in almost a decade. He was hard. He was quiet. He was safe in his isolation. And he saw a woman with bare, broken feet and the map of a whip on her back. He was awkward. He was not a man of gentle words. He fumbled, turning to the bed, pulling back the heavy wool blanket and the worn quilt beneath it. He gestured to the space, his back mostly to her. "Right here." She stared at the bed, then at him. "Sir, I can't. That's your bed." "It's the only one," he said, his voice flat. "And it's the only warm place. Get in." He did not mean it as an order, but it came out that way. He saw her flinch. "Please," he added, his voice softer. "You'll freeze on the floor." She watched him for a long, silent moment. She was judging him, weighing the danger of the man against the danger of the cold. She seemed to find the cold more threatening. She stood, unsteady, the large shirt hanging off her small frame. She kept the blanket she had been wrapped in held tight around her. She moved to the cot and slid under the covers he had pulled back, pressing herself tight against the log wall, as far from the center as she could get. She did not take off his shirt. She kept the other blanket clutched to her chest like a shield. Cal sighed. He took the bearskin rug from the hearth and laid it on the floor, as close to the fire as he could get. "What are you doing?" she whispered from the cot. "Bedding down." "No," she said, "I won't take your bed." She started to sit up. "Stay put," he said, pushing her gently back by the shoulder. Her skin was still cold. "It's fine. I've slept on worse. Get some rest." He turned down the lantern, leaving only the dull orange glow of the fire. He laid down on the rug, his back to her. The cabin was silent again, but it was a different silence. It was the silence of two people, breathing. He could hear the small, hitched sound of her breath, the way she tried to quiet it, as if she was afraid of taking up too much space. He heard her shift, the rustle of the blanket. He lay awake for hours, staring at the fire, his mind on his brother, and on the strangeness of the woman in his bed. Sometime in the deep part of the night, he heard her make a small sound, a tiny, choked sob she muffled instantly. He did not turn. He did not say anything. He just lay still, a silent sentinel, letting her believe he was asleep. He heard her hand move under the blanket, near her waist. He had seen the way she clutched her side, the outline of something hard beneath the wool. He figured it was a knife. He was wrong. She had a pistol. He had seen the butt of it when she'd moved. A small caliber peacemaker, or something like it. She was terrified, but she was not helpless. He lay awake, listening to her breathe, until the first gray light of dawn touched the window. In the morning, the snow had not stopped. It was deeper. The world was gone, buried. He got up from the rug, his back stiff. He built up the fire and put the coffee on. She was awake. He had known she would be. She was watching him, her blue eyes wide in the dim light. She was still too weak to go anywhere. And he knew it. The fever was still on her, a faint flush on her pale cheeks. She said nothing. He said nothing. He ladled broth into a mug and handed it to her. She took it. Her hand brushed his, and her skin was like fire. "It's still coming down," he said, stating the simple fact. "You're not going anywhere today." She looked out the small, frost-caked window at the endless, swirling white. She did not argue. She just nodded, her eyes closing, and drank the broth. He did not ask her to leave. The blizzard lasted 3 more days. It was a white prison, a howling, endless siege. The world shrank to the 4 walls of the cabin, the red glow of the fire, and the constant, high-pitched scream of the wind. Calvin Walker and the woman named May moved around each other in the small space like 2 wary animals forced to share a den. They spoke little. Words felt too loud against the storm. On the 2nd day, her fever broke. She woke from a long sleep, her skin cool, her eyes clear. She pushed herself up from the cot, her movements stiff. Cal was by the stove, shaving strips of jerky into a pot of beans. He heard the shift of the blanket and looked over. "Your feet," he said, his voice a low rumble. "How are they?" She looked down at the bundles of rags. "They hurt." "That's good," he said, turning back to the pot. "Means they ain't dead." He attended to them each night while she slept, rubbing them with tallow to keep the skin from cracking further. It was a grim and necessary task, and he did it with the same impersonal focus he used when mending a saddle. He saw the broken blisters, the deep, bruised purple of the flesh. He had seen frostbite before. She was lucky. She would likely keep them. When the beans were hot, he handed her a plate. She ate, sitting on the edge of the cot. After, she stood up, gathered his plate and her own, and took them to the wash basin. "You don't have to," he said. "I have to," she replied, her back to him. And so, a routine began. It was a silent one. May, it turned out, could not be still. She swept the floor, which was already clean. She took the tin plates and scrubbed them with sand until they shone. She folded his 2 spare blankets, her hands smoothing the wool with a careful, precise pressure. Cal watched her. She was a ghost in his small home, a whisper of movement. She never let him get behind her. If he crossed the room to get his coat, she would pivot, always keeping him in her line of sight, her shoulders hunched. He had a gray gelding in the small barn, a stoic animal named Grit. The horse was his only real companion. When the storm lessened to a dull roar, Cal went to feed him. He returned an hour later to find May in the barn, a brush in her hand, talking in a low, soft murmur to the horse as she worked the tangles from its mane. Grit, who normally pinned his ears at strangers, had his head lowered, his eyes half closed. May froze when she saw Cal. Her hand dropped from the mane, her body tensing, ready to flee. "He likes that," Cal said, nodding toward the brush. "He's a good horse," she whispered. "He's particular. Don't take too many." "He just needs a soft hand," she said, and then her face flushed, as if she had revealed too much. She set the brush down and slipped past him, back to the cabin. Her head low, Cal finished the chores, his mind on her words. A soft hand. He noticed other things, too, the way she flinched. He was not a loud man, but the cabin was small, and life was full of sharp sounds. One evening, he dropped a log onto the stone hearth. The crack was like a pistol shot in the quiet room. May, who was mending a tear in his shirt, cried out, a small, stifled sound, and threw herself back. Her hand flew to her waist, grabbing at the folds of the big shirt she wore. Her eyes were wide and white with terror. Cal raised his hands. "Just the fire," he said, his voice steady. "Just a log." She stared at him, her chest heaving. She looked at her own hand, clutched at her side, and slowly, deliberately, pulled it away. She did not apologize. She just picked up the shirt and began to sew again, her stitches smaller and tighter than before. He knew what she was reaching for. He had seen the small, pearl-handled pistol she kept tucked in the waistband of her borrowed drawers, hidden by the baggy shirt. He had seen it when she stretched to reach the high shelf for the coffee. He said nothing. A woman who had walked barefoot into a blizzard had a right to her secrets and her defenses. He knew she was not sleeping. In the deep of the night, when the fire burned low, he would lie on the bearskin rug, listening. He could hear her breathing, the careful, measured sound of someone pretending to be asleep. He could feel her awake in the darkness, a bundle of taut nerves, waiting for a threat. He wondered what was worse, the blizzard she had run from, or the one she had run into. On the 5th morning, the world was new. The wind had stopped. The sun rose on a landscape of impossible, brilliant white. The snow was piled in drifts as high as the cabin roof. They were snowed in, well and truly. Cal put on his heavy coat. "Have to clear a path to the barn, feed the horse." "I'll help," she said. "Stay inside," he said. "Your feet." He had found an old pair of moccasins, a gift from a Ute man he had helped years ago. They were too big, but she wore them, stuffed with rags. He had also offered his spare pair of work boots. "They're thick," he'd said, holding them out. "The leather will keep the wet out." She had looked at the boots, and a strange, cold expression had crossed her face. "No, thank you. The moccasins are fine." He spent the morning digging, the work hard, the air sharp and cold in his lungs. The silence of the world was vast. When he finished, he leaned on the shovel, catching his breath. He looked back toward the cabin. The door was open. He saw tracks, small tracks, made by the moccasins. They led away from the cabin, toward the windbreak of pines at the edge of the clearing. He felt a sudden, sharp spike of unease. He followed the tracks. He found her standing at the tree line, looking out over the endless white expanse. She was not wearing the moccasins. She was standing barefoot in the snow. She was crying, not loud, but a deep, shuddering, silent grief that shook her whole body. "May?" She jumped, startled, and tried to hide her face. She stumbled back, her feet sinking deep. "May, what are you doing?" Cal's voice was rougher than he intended. He was not angry. He was afraid for her. "Get inside. You'll lose your feet for good." He reached for her, and she flinched away from his hand. "I can't," she choked out, the tears freezing on her cheeks. "I can't wear them. I can't." "Can't wear what?" He was confused. "The moccasins?" "Shoes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Any of them. I can't." "That's crazy talk. It's 10 degrees. You'll die out here." He always, she was gasping for air. He always bought the shoes. He liked them. Shiny, with high heels. He said a woman with shoes is a woman who thinks she can walk away. He would make me put them on. And then, she stopped, her hand going to her mouth. "When I ran," she said, her voice a raw whisper. "I left them. I threw them in the fire. I swore I can't put them on again. It makes me feel like I am still his." Cal's own breath plumed in the air. He looked at her, this small, broken thing, vibrating with a pain he could not understand. He looked at her blue-white feet, planted in the snow as if she were trying to punish them. He did not grab her. He did not yell. He just took off his own heavy coat, the thick wool lined with sheepskin, and wrapped it around her, pulling the collar up around her face. He bent down, and before she could protest, he scooped her up. She was light, like a bundle of dry sticks. She did not fight him. She buried her face in the warm, sheepskin collar of his coat and held on, her body shaking. He carried her back to the cabin, his own boots sinking deep with the extra weight. He kicked the door shut and set her down on the bench by the fire. He knelt, taking her frozen feet in his hands. He began to rub them, hard, forcing the blood back into them. "You can't do that again. May, you understand. You can't." She was sobbing now, the dam of her control finally broken. I'm sorry. I saw the sun, and I thought I could go, but there's nowhere to go, and I can't." "Hush," he said. He finished with her feet, wrapping them again in the dry rags. He stood up. He did not touch her. He did not put his arm around her. He did not know how. He sat on the bench, a foot of space between them. He stared at the fire. The only sound was her ragged breathing as she tried to quiet herself. He felt a deep, cold anger, the kind he had not felt since the day he buried Elias. It was a still, hard anger. He placed his hand on the bench, palm up, in the space between them. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was just a presence, something solid in the room. "You are safe here," he said, his voice low and certain. He did not look at her. He looked at the flames. "No one gets to own you again." She went utterly still. The sound of her crying stopped. He could feel her looking at him. After a long time, she spoke. Her voice was flat, empty. "He said he owned me. He said the law gave him the right." Cal said nothing. He knew the law. He knew what it said about wives. His father is Judge Abernathy. She said. Cal's blood went cold. He knew that name. Everyone in the territory knew that name. Judge Abernathy owned the town, the bank, and half the legislature. He was a man who cast a shadow hundreds of miles long. My PA, May said, her voice dull. He had a small ranch. He got into debt with the judge, a feed bill, then a banknote. It was a lie. They falsified the papers. They were going to take everything. The judge, he came to PA. He said he would forgive the debt. She did not need to finish. Cal understood. A false debt scandal. A trade. His son, Elias. His name is Elias. Cal flinched. The name was like a slap. His brother's name. He was not, she whispered. A kind man. He drank. He said I was his property, and property had to be disciplined. He said it was his right. He said a wife must be corrected, or she would grow willful. He used a strap. He said it was for my own good. Cal closed his eyes. He heard the echo of the men who had held him down, smelled the whiskey on their breath, saw his brother's face. We know how to handle thieves. I endured it, she said. Her voice was so quiet. He had to strain to hear it. I thought I had no choice. And then I have a child, a baby boy, Thomas. She stopped. The silence in the cabin was absolute. He was small, but he was healthy. I loved him. He was the only thing. And then the fever came. This winter, he didn't last the night. She was not crying. She was far beyond tears. She was in the dead, cold place that came after. He's buried, in the back, behind the judge's house. A small grave. I piled the stones myself. Her voice cracked. Elias, he said it was my fault. He said I was weak, that my blood was weak, that I had failed him. He had men over from the ranch. They were drinking. He was angry. He backhanded me right in the kitchen in front of them, and they laughed. She took a shaky breath. They laughed, as if I was a dog he was training, and I knew he would. He would keep doing it, and my baby was gone. There was nothing left to stay for. That night, I waited. I took the little gun I had hidden, and I ran. I just ran. I did not even take shoes. She finished. The story hung in the air, a living, terrible thing. Cal did not move. He did not speak for a long time. He felt the weight of her words settle on him, on the cabin, on the whole white world. He thought of his brother, Elias, who had been full of laughter, and this other Elias, who was full of darkness. He thought of the mob, and the judge, and the laughter of cruel men. They were all the same. He finally turned his head and looked at her. Her face was pale, her eyes empty. She was not looking for pity. She was just stated. You don't have to tell me anything else, he said, his voice quiet. Unless you want to. That was all. He gave her back the one thing they had taken, the right to her own silence. She looked at him, and for the first time, the fear in her eyes was replaced by something else, a flicker of understanding. She nodded. Once. That night, the routine changed, when it was time to sleep. Cal threw the bearskin rug on the floor. No, May said. She was standing by the cot. I'm fine on the floor. He said. The floor is cold, she said. The bed is wide enough for warmth. Please. It was a request, an offering. He looked at her. He saw the trust she was placing in him. It was a fragile, heavy thing. He nodded. He laid down on the cot, on the outside, his back to her. She slid under the blankets, pressing herself against the cold log wall, as she had before. But the air was different. The silence was not tense. It was shared. He lay awake, listening to the cabin settle. He heard her breathing begin to deepen, to finally, truly relax. He was almost asleep himself when he felt a small movement. She had turned in her sleep. Her body had uncurled from its defensive knot. Her hand, which had been clutched at her chest, came to rest on his shoulder. It was a light, unconscious touch. He went still. She sighed. A long, shuddering breath. The sound of a burden finally set down. She drifted deeper into sleep, a sleep she had not known in months. She moved closer, seeking the simple, animal warmth. Her head came to rest on his chest. Cal lay rigid, staring up at the dark ceiling. He felt the slow, steady rhythm of her breathing. He felt the dampness of a single tear that had escaped her closed eye, falling onto the rough wool of his shirt. He did not move. He did not breathe. He just lay there, a silent guardian in the dark, the weight of her trust heavier than any blizzard. And outside, under the cold, bright moon, the snow was no longer perfect. Near the barn, half hidden by a drift, was a set of tracks. They were not Cal's. They were not May's. They were from a shod horse. Someone had ridden close, circled the cabin, and sat for a long time, watching the smoke rise from the chimney. Then they had turned and ridden away, back toward the town. The thaw came on a Tuesday. It did not come gently. The world, which had been locked in a silent, white tomb, began to weep. Water dripped from the eaves of the cabin. The creek, which had been a frozen ribbon of ice, began to roar. The snow, heavy and wet, slumped off the pines, falling to the ground with dull, heavy whumps. Calvin Walker felt the change in his bones. The cold, dry air he preferred was gone, replaced by a damp, heavy atmosphere that smelled of wet earth and rot. He was mending a breach in his windbreak, his gloves soaked, the wood slick in his hands, when he heard the sound. It was the plodding, sucking sound of a horse moving through deep, wet snow. He went still. His hand did not move toward his pistol, but it rested on the axe handle in his belt. He did not get visitors. In 8 years, he could count them on one hand. He watched the tree line. A single rider emerged, a man on a mule. His body slumped against the damp. Cal relaxed, but only slightly. He recognized the man. Jebediah Stone. Jeb ran a few head of cattle 20 miles to the south. A man as quiet and as worn as Cal himself. They sometimes crossed paths on the summer range. "Cal," Jeb called, his voice rough. He stopped the mule a good 10 yards away. "Hell of a winter." "It ain't over," Cal said, not moving. Jeb spat a brown stream of tobacco juice onto the snow. No, it ain't. But it's breaking. Figured I'd make for town. Get some supplies, salt, coffee." "Town's a long ride?" "It is." Jeb adjusted his hat, his eyes darting to the cabin, where a thin curl of smoke rose from the chimney. He looked back at Cal. "Seen a thing in town? Cal, at the marshal's office. Thought of you. You being isolated." Cal waited. He did not like this. Jeb was a man who talked about cattle prices and the weather. He was not a man who brought news. "There's a bounty," Jeb said, lowering his voice, though no one was around to hear. "Posted by Judge Abernathy's people, for a woman." Cal's heart, which he thought had turned to a cold stone years ago, gave a single, hard jolt against his ribs. He kept his face impassive. "That's so." "Aye, a runaway. Young woman, dark hair, name of May." Cal focused on the axe in his hand. He ran his thumb over the grain of the wood. "They're saying she stole something," Jeb continued, his eyes on his mule's ears. He cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "A large sum of money. Jewelry. From the judge's son." "Robbery," Cal said. The word was flat. "That's what the poster says." Jeb finally looked at him. His eyes were old and tired. "It's a big bounty. Cal, $500, dead or alive. There's men in town talking. Men who ain't ranchers. Hard men. They see that kind of money. And with the thaw, they'll be riding." "Judge Abernathy's son," Cal said. "Elias Abernathy." Jeb confirmed. "He's the one who signed it. The judge's name is on it too, as a witness. Makes it official." Cal nodded. Slowly, he understood. A runaway wife was a domestic matter. A fugitive accused of robbery was a hangable offense. It was a lie, but it was a lie backed by enough power to make it true. "Why tell me, Jeb?" Jeb Stone looked at the ground, then back at Cal. "I knew your brother. Cal, I knew Elias. He was a good lad, full of vinegar. What they'd done to him, it was wrong. I was one of the men who, well, I was too late, but I never trusted that town. Or the judge. Again." He looked at Cal's cabin, at the single plume of smoke. "A man alone. He ought to know who's comin', who might be driftin' onto his land looking for more than lost cattle." "I'm grateful, Jeb." "Just be watchful. Cal, they ain't playin'. This ain't about money. It's about property, and the judge don't like to lose what's his." Jeb tugged on his reins. "Weather's turnin'. I'll be getting on." He turned the mule and plodded back the way he came. Cal stood for a long time, watching him disappear. The dripping of the water from the trees sounded like 1,000 ticking clocks. He turned and walked back to the cabin. May was by the fire, mending the same shirt she had been working on for a week. She had a peacefulness to her he had not seen before. The hunted look in her eyes had softened. She looked up when he entered, a small, hesitant smile on her face. The smile died when she saw his expression. "What is it?" she asked, putting the sewing down. Cal shut the door. The latch dropping into place sounded unnaturally loud. "My neighbor, Jeb Stone, just rode by. He came from town." May's hand went to her throat. "Town." "He saw a notice, a bounty poster." She did not need him to say more. All the color drained from her face. She looked, once again, like the half-frozen woman he had found in the snow. They're looking for me." "They are." Cal leaned against the door. His arms crossed. "They're calling it robbery. $500. For a runaway woman. Name of May." "Robbery?" she whispered. Her voice was full of a new, cold horror. I took nothing. I took nothing. Not a cent. Not even the clothes I know," Cal said. "It's a lie." "A lie?" She stood up, her eyes wide, darting around the small cabin as if the walls were closing in. "Robbery. They can hang me. They can hang me for that. It's so they can hunt you, May, so any man can." "Then I have to—" She moved, fast, scrambling to the cot, pulling the small bag she had made from a spare flour sack. "I have to go, now, before they— Cal, they'll come here. Elias, he'll know I came this way. He'll track me." "You can't," Cal said, his voice flat. "The passes are a sea of mud and snowmelt. You won't last 2 days." "I have to—" Her voice was rising, sharp with panic. I won't bring them to you. I won't be the reason a mob comes to your door. I won't." "We'll wait. We'll see." "No," she screamed. It was the loudest sound he had ever heard her make. It was a sound of pure terror. "There is no we. There is just me and them. You don't understand. He will never stop." She ran to the door, grabbing her coat. He moved, blocking her path. He was not rough, but he was immovable. A wall of broad shoulders and grim resolve. "Get out of my way, Cal." "No." Please, let me go. I'd rather die in the snow than have him drag me back. Or or see them hurt you." "You ain't going," he said. "It's suicide." "It's my choice." She tried to push past him. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "May, stop." The moment he closed his hand on her, she changed. The pleading woman vanished. The hunted animal took over. She ripped her arm from his grasp, stumbling back. Her hand dove to her waist, to the small pistol hidden there. She pulled it. She was fast, faster than he would have believed. The gun came up. The small, dark bore pointed directly at his heart. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to use both to steady it. "Let me go!" Her voice was a low, desperate hiss. Tears were streaming down her face, but her eyes were cold. Cal Van Walker did not flinch. He did not move. He had faced a mob. He had faced a blizzard. He had faced a grief that could kill a man. A small, trembling gun in the hand of a terrified woman did not scare him. He looked at the pistol. He looked at her eyes. He saw the cornered, desperate thing she was. He saw the abuse, the fear, the judge, the grave of her child. He slowly, so slowly, raised his right hand. He did not reach for the gun. He did not make a grab. He just placed his hand over hers. His large, calloused, warm hand completely covered her small, cold ones, his fingers gently closing over the hand that held the pistol. He did not push it away. He just held it, held her. "I know," he said, his voice a low, rough murmur. "I've been hunted too." She stared at him. Her breath caught in a sob. His words, his touch. It was not the touch of a man trying to control, or hurt, or take. It was the touch of an anchor. Her shoulders began to shake. The strength, the false, terrified bravado, drained out of her. The pistol wavered. I can't," she whispered. The gun slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the rough floorboards. She broke. It was not a quiet weeping. It was a complete and total collapse. Her legs gave out, and she fell forward. Cal caught her. He dropped his arms from the door and pulled her against his chest, catching her as she fell. He wrapped his arms around her, one hand tangling in her hair, holding the back of her head, the other holding her tight against his waist. He held her as she sobbed, as she beat her fists, weakly, against his chest. He had not held another person in 8 years. He had forgotten the feel of it. He was awkward, stiff, but he was solid. He was there. He held her in the dim cabin, his back to the door, shielding her from the world that was coming for them. He did not say, "It will be all right." He did not say, "Do not cry." He just stood there, a silent mountain, and let her break against him. He held her for a long time, until the racking sobs quieted into shuddering breaths. He could feel the small, frantic pounding of her heart against his own. Finally, he loosened his grip. He bent, picked up her pistol from the floor, and placed it gently on the table. He led her to the bench by the fire, which had burned low. He put another log on, and the flame sparked back to life. He sat beside her, but not too close. "They won't take you," he said. She was huddled, staring into the flames. "You don't know them. The judge. He owns the law here. They'll come. They'll do what they did to your brother." He looked at her, surprised. "How?" "The neighbor, Jeb, he said. He said he knew your brother, Elias. The same name. I'm sorry. Cal, I'm so sorry." "It wasn't your fault," he said. "It was theirs. It was the town, the mob." "It'll be the same mob," she whispered. "For me." He was silent for a long time. He stood and walked to the wall, where a small, cracked map of the territories was nailed. He stared at it. "No," he said, his voice changing. It was no longer just quiet. It was hard. "They won't get the chance. You can't go east. You can't go south. They'll be watching." He traced a line on the map with his finger. "We go north, up through the high pass. It's..." It's a hard ride. It's called the Devil's Tooth. But the thaw will clear most of it in a few days. And no one will expect a man and a woman to try it. Not this early. We? She asked, her voice small. We, he said. It'll take us into Montana. I knew some people. In the Bitterroot Valley. Years ago. They owed Elias, not my brother, the other, your... No, she said, standing up. Cal, no, you can't. This isn't your fight. It's my execution. I won't let them string you up for helping me. I'll go alone. Just give me the map. I can... You can what? He said, turning on her. His voice was rough, but it was not angry. It was something else. You can die in a snowdrift. You can get caught by those bounty hunters. You can let them drag you back to him. It's better than getting you killed, she cried. I won't be the one. I won't be the one who hangs you. You don't owe me anything. The words hung in the air between them. You don't owe me anything. He looked at her face, pale and tear-streaked in the firelight, at her hands, clenched at her sides, at the fierce, broken pride in her eyes. He thought of his life, the long, silent 8 years, the cold bed, the empty chair, the silence. He was a man of few words. He did not know how to say what he felt. He did not know the language for it. Maybe not, he said. His voice was thick. It broke. But I want to. The admission was a shock. It was more intimate than a touch. I want it. It was a choice to step out of the fortress he had built, a choice to rejoin the world of the living and the hunted. May stared at him. Her lips parted. She saw not a rescuer. She saw a man as lost as she was, reaching for a hand. He took a step toward her. The space between them was electric. He was close enough to feel the warmth of her breath. He looked at her mouth. She looked at his. She did not pull away. She did not flinch. She leaned in, just a fraction. He bent his head. This was it. This was the moment. A long, mournful howl split the night. A wolf, somewhere on the high ridge, greeting the thaw. Both of them jumped. The spell was broken. At the same instant, a gust of wind, the leading edge of a new front, slammed the barn doors shut with a loud, hollow thud. Cal stepped back. The moment was gone, shattered by the wildness outside. He ran a hand over his face. Get some sleep, he said, his voice rougher than ever. The passes won't wait. We'll need to be strong. The next day, the cabin was a place of quiet, desperate purpose. The thaw had held. The snow was visibly sinking, the ground turning to a thick, sucking mud. They had to leave. They both knew it. They worked. They did not talk about the night before. They did not talk about the riders. They talked about tasks. We need jerky, Cal said, and coffee, all we can carry. I can bind your feet, he said, looking at the moccasins. With oilcloth. It'll keep the wet out. It ain't shoes. Thank you, she said, her voice quiet. He packed the saddlebags for his horse. Grit. May watched him. You have another horse, she said. A mare, in the barn. Molly, she's not as strong as Grit, but she's sure-footed. They were a team. He checked the horse's shoes, cleaning them, tightening them. She bundled bandages, salt, and matches into small, watertight packets. He brought his rifle to the table, a Winchester. He began to break it down, his hands moving with a fluid, practiced motion. My PA had one like that, she said, coming to stand beside him. He looked up. He taught me, she said. She picked up a cleaning rag and the oil. He said a woman who couldn't shoot was just prey. She took the barrel from him and began to clean it, her hands as sure as his own. She was not a trembling victim. She was a woman who knew how to survive. He watched her, a strange feeling in his chest. It was respect. He worked on his Colt, checking the cylinder, reloading it. He was clumsy, his fingers thick and cold. He fumbled a cartridge. It slipped, bounced on the table, and rolled onto the floor, disappearing under the dark, dusty stove. Cal cursed, a low, soft sound. Damn it! He got down on his hands and knees, peering into the darkness. He grunted, reaching deep under the stove, his broad shoulders blocking the light. He pawed around in the dust and cobwebs. Finally, he got it. He stood up, his hat askew, a long gray cobweb draped over the brim and trailing down his ear. He brushed at his shirt, frustrated. He looked at May. She was watching him, her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were bright. A small sound escaped her. A puff of air. A choke. It was a laugh. She tried to stifle it, but it bubbled up. It was a clear, clean sound, like water from a spring. Cal froze. He had never heard her laugh. He had forgotten what the sound was like. "What?" he grumbled, but there was no heat in it. "You have," she said, pointing, and she laughed again. A real, full laugh. "You, a spider's." He reached up and felt the cobweb. He pulled it off, looking at the dusty, gray thing in his hand. He looked at her face, which was transformed. The fear was gone. The grief was gone. For 1 second, she was just a woman, laughing. A slow, rusty, unused smile cracked his own face. It felt strange. He let out a short, sharp huff of air. It was his laugh. It was as rough as his voice, but it was real. The sound of it, of both of them, filled the small cabin. It was a sound of life. The moment lasted a second. Then, it was gone. But something had changed. The air was lighter. Cal put his hat on, straight this time. We'll pack the mare." He went outside. The air was colder. The wind was picking up again. He walked to the barn, the good, clean feeling of that laugh still in his chest. He felt almost light. He was in the barn, saddling the mare, when he felt it, a prickle on his neck, the old, familiar feeling of being watched. His cabin was set low, in a hollow. The ridges around it were high. He kept a small spyglass on a nail in the barn, for checking cattle in the high pasture. He grabbed it. He put the glass to his eye, scanning the north ridge, the ridge they would have to cross. At first, nothing, just snow, rock, and melting drifts. Then, movement. 3 riders. They were miles off, black specks against the graying snow. They were not ranchers. Ranchers did not ride the high ridges in a thaw. They moved slowly, purposefully. They stopped, clustered together. They were looking down at his cabin. One of them moved, turning his horse. The sun, weak as it was, broke through the clouds for a moment. It glinted, a sharp, cold flash, off something on the man's chest. A badge. Cal's blood went cold. The lightness, the laughter, it all evaporated. He dropped the spyglass. He ran from the barn, kicking the door shut behind him. He burst into the cabin, the wind whipping in with him. May looked up, her smile fading, the rifle part still in her hand. "They're here," he said, his voice flat and dead. "Riders, on the ridge. Get away from the window." The thaw had brought them. The hunt was over. The world outside the cabin windows was no longer white. It was a weeping, gray-brown mess. The thaw had turned the snow to heavy slush, and the ground beneath into a sucking, greedy mud that pulled at a man's boots. The air was damp, and the sound of dripping water was constant. Calvin Walker stood at the small window, watching the ridge line. He had been there for an hour, his rifle cleaned and reassembled, leaning against the wall by the door. "They won't come in this," May said, her voice small. She was packing the last of the jerky into a canvas sack. "The mud, it's too deep." "They'll come," Cal said. He had seen the badge. The law did not care about mud. And this was not about the law. They know we're here. They know we're trapped. They'll come before the pass is clear. What do? We wait. He looked at the bearskin rug on the floor. There's a cellar, he said, his voice low. Under that rug. It's not deep, just a hole for roots and potatoes. But it's dark. May looked at the rug, and her face went pale. She nodded, understanding. When I tell you, he said. They did not have to wait long. He heard it first. Not a clear sound, but a disturbance. The wet, ugly sound of shod horses fighting the mud. It was closer than he expected. Now, he said, his voice flat. He did not look at her. He just moved to the rug, pulled it back, and lifted the heavy, rough-hewn trap door. A smell of cold earth and damp potatoes rose from the black square. May's breath hitched. She looked at the hole, then at Cal. Her terror was not of the riders. It was of the box. I can't, It's the only way, Cal said, his voice hard, but not unkind. They will not look there first. Get in. Be silent. No matter what you hear, do not make a sound. She grabbed her small pistol from the table. He nodded. She lowered herself into the hole, pulling her knees to her chest. She was small enough that she fit easily. She looked up at him, her face a pale oval in the darkness. He put the trap door back in place, the wood groaning softly. He dragged the heavy bearskin rug back over it. He kicked the dirt around the edges to hide the lines. Then he moved to the stove, poured himself a cup of coffee he did not want, and sat at the table. He forced his body to relax. He left his rifle on the wall. He put his revolver on the table, but loosely, as if he had just been cleaning it. The sound of the horses grew. Stopping right outside his porch, a man's voice, rough and impatient. Walker! Cal Walker! Show yourself! Cal took a slow sip of the bitter coffee. He stood, his movements deliberately unhurried, and opened the cabin door. 3 men sat on horseback, their animals steaming in the damp air. They were splattered with mud, their face dark with stubble and cold. The man in the center was the one he had seen through the spyglass. He was a big man, with a heavy gut straining his wet coat. A tarnished deputy's badge was pinned crookedly on it. Cal recognized him instantly. The face was older, bloated with whiskey and time, but the eyes were the same cold, arrogant eyes that had stared at him from the light of a torch. 8 years ago, it was Brody, the man who had sneered at him, who had held him down while others took his brother. That's him, one of the other men, a younger, thinner one, said. Afternoon, Cal said. His voice was steady. The world seemed to shrink to the space between him and this man. We're on official business. Walker, Brody said, his voice a gravelly rumble. He did not dismount. He looked at Cal's cabin, his eyes full of smug assessment. Authority of Judge Abernathy. Cal just waited, his hand resting on the doorframe. We're looking for a fugitive. Brody continued. He pulled a piece of paper from his coat, though it was too wet to read. A woman. Calls herself May. Dark hair, young. Run off from Mr. Elias Abernathy. Stole a quantity of money and goods. Cal looked past him, at the gray, dripping sky. Heard you moved up here, Walker. Got real quiet. Cal looked back at him. I like quiet. That a fact? Brody's eyes narrowed. He looked past Cal into the dim cabin. A man alone. All winter. It's a hard life. You seen anyone? Anyone passing through? We got word a person might have come this way. The lie came easy. It tasted like ash, but it came easy. I've been alone since the fall, Cal said. His voice flat. Ain't seen a soul. Nothing but snow. And now mud. Brody stared at him. A long, heavy silence. Cal could feel May breathing beneath his feet. He prayed the man could not hear it. That right? Brody said, a slow, unpleasant smile spreading across his face. Just alone. All that time. No company. No company, Cal repeated. The man to Brody's left, the thin one, shifted in his saddle. Boss, he's lying. Look at the barn. 2 horses. I seen 'em. Cal's heart hammered. He had forgotten. Grit was in the stall. Molly, the mare he had saddled for May, was in the other. Brody's smile widened. He had not been asking. He had been trapping. Got 2 horses, Walker, but you're all alone. That's curious. I keep a spare, Cal said, his voice tightening. For packing. A spare, Brody mused. He leaned forward, resting his thick arms on the saddle horn. You know, Walker, I remember you, 8 years ago, the disturbance with your brother. Cal's hand tightened on the doorframe. You tried to stop us, as I recall, Brody said, his voice dropping to a conversational, cruel tone. You were loud, yelling about justice. I think then you got real quiet, just vanished. He looked around at the homestead, the small cabin, the muddy clearing. This is where you ran. I didn't run, Cal said, his voice a low growl. Looks like running to me, Brody said. He spat into the mud by the porch. And now here you are, lying to the law, harboring a thief, the judge. He don't like that. He don't like that at all. I told you, Cal said. I ain't seen anyone. Brody laughed. A short, sharp bark. You always was a bad liar. Walker, we know she's here. The tracks we saw, they weren't old. He was bluffing. The tracks from yesterday, the ones Jeb had seen, would be gone in this mud. But they were here anyway. They knew. We're gonna search the place, Brody said, his hand dropping to the butt of his pistol. You got a warrant? Cal asked. Brody's smile vanished. I got a badge, and I got 2 men. That's all the warrant I need in this territory when I'm hunting a fugitive. You ain't, Cal started. You gonna stop us? Brody asked, his voice soft, dangerous. Like you tried to stop us before. How'd that work out for your brother? The air went dead. Cal felt the blood drain from his face, replaced by a cold, white rage he had not felt in 8 years. He wanted to pull the revolver from the table and end this man. But he thought of May, under the floor. Search, Cal said, stepping back from the door. His voice choked. Then get off my land. Oh, we will, Brody said. He dismounted, his boots sinking deep. The other 2 followed. But we'll be thorough. The judge insists. Brody pushed past Cal into the cabin, his wet coat dripping muddy water onto the floor. He kicked the chair. Place ain't much. He looked at the single cot. Bed's made. That's neat for a man alone. He stomped across the floor. He walked right over the bearskin rug. Cal's body went rigid. Brody stopped, his heel on the edge of the rug. He looked down. He looked at Cal. Cal's hand was on the table, near his pistol. Brody smiled. Nah, he said, and kicked the rug aside. The trapdoor was visible, the crude, wooden square. Well, Brody said. What's this? He unholstered his pistol. Open it, Walker. Cal did not move. I said, open it, Brody barked. The other 2 men raised their rifles, pointing them at Cal's chest. Slowly, Cal bent down. He put his fingers into the small iron ring and pulled. The heavy door scraped open. Brody pointed his pistol into the blackness. Come on out, little lady. The game's over. Nothing. Don't make me shoot in there, Brody said, his voice laced with ugly pleasure. It's messy. A small sob, and then May's voice. Don't shoot. She emerged, covered in dirt, her eyes wide with terror. She had her own pistol in her hand, but it was pointing at the floor. Drop it." The thin man snapped. May let the pistol fall. Brody laughed. "Well, look at that. Like a little rat in a trap." He looked at Cal. "I knew it. You got that same stupid righteous look your brother had right before we—" "Shut your mouth," Cal snarled. "Take 'em," Brody ordered. "Her for the judge, him for interfering with the law." The men moved in, but Cal was already moving. He had not been standing still. He had been waiting. He grabbed the heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove and swung it, hard. He caught the thin man across the side of the head. The man dropped like a sack of feed. The third man fired his rifle, but Cal was already low, tackling him, driving him back against the wall. The rifle shot went wild, shattering the window. Brody bellowed, raising his pistol, but May, who had been a frozen statue of fear, acted. She grabbed the boiling kettle of water from the stove hook and threw it. The scalding water hit Brody square in the face. He screamed, a high, thin sound, dropping his gun and clutching his eyes. "Run!" Cal yelled. He grabbed his rifle from the wall. He grabbed May's arm. "The barn! Go!" He shoved her out the door. He fired a shot over the head of the man he had tackled, who was scrambling for his rifle. Cal burst out onto the porch. The thin man was on the ground, groaning. Brody was blind, screaming. The third man was trapped in the cabin. "The horses!" Cal yelled. They ran, slipping and falling in the deep mud, toward the barn. They could hear Brody shouting, "Shoot them! Shoot them, you fools!" They reached the barn. Cal slammed the heavy door and dropped the bar. It would not hold for long. "Up," he said, pointing. "The loft." He scrambled up the ladder, pulling May up after him. They fell into the hay, panting, their hearts pounding. We, May was gasping. "What now?" Cal was already at the small loft window, his rifle out. He could see the cabin. The third man burst out, looked around, and fired a wild shot at the barn. It splintered the wood, 10 feet below them. Brody staggered onto the porch, his face a red, blistered map. "They're in the barn! Get 'em! Burn 'em out!" "No," the third man yelled. "Boss, the horses, they're in there." "I don't care. Burn it! Burn it all!" Cal's blood ran cold. He looked at May. Her face was a mask of disbelief. He'll do it," Cal said. He looked around the loft. There was one other window, at the back. It was high, and it led to a steep drop into a snowdrift. He moved to the back window. He smashed it with the butt of his rifle. "We have to go," he said. He looked down. It was a 20-foot drop. The snow was deep, but— "No," May said. "Cal, your horses." "They're just horses," he said, his voice raw. He heard a noise from below. They were piling wood against the door. He threw the saddlebags, the jerky, the blankets, out the window. "We jump, now. I'll go first." "No," May said, her voice quiet. She was looking at the cabin. "Wait." The third man was running toward the barn, a lit torch in his hand. He had gotten it from the cabin fire. "May, now." "No." She raised her small pistol, the one she had picked up before they ran. She rested it on the sill of the loft window. She was steady. "May, that's too far." She fired. The small pistol's crack was sharp. The man with the torch stumbled. He looked at his leg. He fired back, wildly. May fired again, and again. She emptied the gun. The man fell. He did not get up. From the cabin, Brody was screaming, a string of terrible, blind curses. "Come on," Cal said. He grabbed her. They went to the back window. He looked down. It's the only way." "We can't," May said, her voice dead. "Cal, look." He looked where she was pointing. The thin man, the one Cal had hit with the skillet, was staggering out of the cabin. He had a rifle. He was conscious. They were trapped, one man blind, one wounded, and one man with a rifle, between them and the woods. Cal pushed May away from the window. "Get down! Get in the hay!" He looked at the ladder. He heard them outside. They were shouting. They knew they were trapped. "Cal," May whispered. She was huddled in the hay, her face white. I'm sorry." "Don't be," he said. He checked his rifle. "We wait." They sat in the dim, cold hayloft. The adrenaline faded, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. The barn was silent. The men outside were silent. "What are they doing?" she whispered. "Waiting," Cal said. "Waiting for dark." And so they waited. The hours passed. The dim light in the barn faded. The mud outside began to stiffen as the temperature dropped. Night was coming. They were huddled together in the hay, buried deep for warmth. They were back to back, Cal watching the ladder, May watching the back window, though no one could get in that way. They'll wait for us to sleep," she said. "I won't sleep," he said. "You have to." The silence stretched. It was worse than the yelling. Finally, May crawled over to him. She sat beside him, her shoulder pressing against his. "Cal," she said, he recognized you, Brody." "I know." This isn't about me anymore, is it?" "It was never just about you," he said, his voice rough. It was about him and them, the mob." She was quiet. She looked at their meager supplies, the saddlebags they could not reach. "Will you, if we get out of this, will you still leave with me?" she asked. Her voice was so small, he barely heard it. She was testing him, giving him one last chance to cut her loose. He turned his head. In the gloom, he could just see her profile. He saw the strength that had held the pistol. He saw the woman who had run barefoot into a blizzard. "We'll both ride," he said, his voice thick. "Or neither. That's the end of it." She let out a long, shuddering breath. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "All right," she whispered. "All right." The night grew deeper. The cold was a physical thing, a weight. They were both shivering. We have to share the blankets," she said. He nodded. They moved deeper into the hay, arranging the blankets over them, huddling together like two animals in a burrow. They lay facing each other, a few inches apart. The silence of the barn was absolute, save for the sound of their own breathing and the occasional stamp of a horse below. The men outside were impossibly quiet. May's hand, small and freezing cold, found his in the darkness. She laced her fingers through his. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Me too," he said. It was the truth. She moved closer, pressing her face against his chest, seeking his warmth. He put his arm around her, pulling her tight. It was not a gesture of intimacy. It was a gesture of survival. But it became something else. In the dark, with the threat of death just feet away, the barriers between them dissolved. There was no past. There was no future. There was only this cold, dark moment. "May," he whispered. She looked up at him. He could not see her eyes, but he felt her gaze. "Why?" she started, her voice a dry rasp. "Why are you still alone? After all these years, was it just him, your brother?" He thought. He had told himself it was because he liked the quiet. He had told himself it was because he hated people. He realized, in that moment, neither was true. "Elias, he trusted everyone," Cal whispered, his hand tracing the line of her hair. After I didn't trust anyone. I figured, when it got hard, everyone ran, everyone leaves." He paused, the admission hanging in the dark. "I never found anyone I trusted not to run." She went still against him. He felt her digest the words. She understood. She who had run from a life of brutality. She who had offered to run alone, to spare him. "I'm still here," she whispered. She rose up on one elbow. She touched his face, her fingers tracing the rough stubble on his jaw. It was a gesture of such profound, tender bravery. He met her, his mouth finding hers in the dark. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of desperation, of comfort, of a shared, terrible fate. It was chapped lips and cold skin and the taste of fear. She pulled back. "I'm so cold, Cal." He knew what she was asking. He knew what she was offering. A final, human comfort. A moment of stillness in the eye of the storm. He said nothing. He just opened the blankets. She moved against him, her skin icy. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tight, sharing his own meager warmth. He felt her small, pistol-grip hand on his chest, her head tucked under his chin. They were not a man and a woman. They were just two souls, pressed together, trying to find a safe harbor in a world that was determined to burn them. It was a moment of absolute stillness, of shared breath, of skin against skin, a silent vow made in the hay. It was a tender, quiet comfort, a release of a long-held breath. And in that shared, impossible safety, they finally, foolishly, drifted into an exhausted sleep. Cal woke with a jolt. The stillness was gone. The air was not cold, it was hot. He sat bolt upright, his lungs filling with acrid, stinging smoke. He coughed, a racking, dry sound. Below them, through the floorboards, came a hungry, orange light. A roar, not of wind, the roar of fire. He heard Brody, outside, screaming with a high, cracked voice. "That's it! Burn 'em out! Burn the traitors alive!" Cal shook May, his heart a cold stone in his chest. "May, wake up! Fire!" He scrambled to the edge of the loft and looked down. The ladder was gone. The entire stall below them was a churning, white-hot inferno. The hay, dry as tinder, had gone up in an instant. They were in a wooden box, 20 feet in the air, and it was burning. The air was not air. It was a suffocating, stinging poison. Cal Van Walker woke to a world of orange and black, a heat so intense it felt like a physical blow. The roar was deafening, the sound of 1,000 angry voices. Below his feet, the floorboards of the loft were already buckling, the gaps between them glowing like the bars of a furnace. "May!" he roared, his voice cracking in the smoke. He had fallen asleep holding her. He was now alone. He scrambled to his feet, the hay around him a carpet of smoldering embers. The smoke was a solid, churning wall. He could not see. "May!" He heard a cough, a weak, desperate sound. It came from the far side of the loft, near the front, where the main inferno was climbing the walls. She must have rolled away in her sleep, or tried to crawl away from the heat and gone the wrong way. A sheet of flame, having eaten through the floor, erupted between them, a curtain of fire. He could see her now, a small, dark shape huddled against the wall, trying to press herself through the wood. She was on her hands and knees, coughing, her body racked with tremors. She was trapped. Cal did not hesitate. He did not think. He pulled the wool blanket they had shared up over his head, took one last gulp of the slightly cleaner air near the floor, and ran. He ran directly through the wall of fire. The heat was unimaginable. It seared his lungs, his hair, his clothes. He felt the wool blanket begin to smolder. He burst through the flames and fell, grabbing for her. "Cal!" she wheezed, her eyes rolling back. She was seconds from passing out. "Got you," he grunted. He scooped her up. She was light, a dead weight in his arms. He turned back. The way he had come was now a solid mass of fire. The main support beam gave way with a sound like a cannon shot, sending a volcano of sparks and burning hay into the air. The whole structure groaned, tilting. "The back!" he yelled. though she could not hear him. He ran, carrying her, his boots slipping on burning straw. He knew they had seconds. He reached the small rear window they had identified hours before. The smoke was thinner here, drawn out by the hole he had smashed. He laid her down for 1 second. Grabbing the saddlebags and his rifle, he threw them out the window. They vanished into the dark, followed by a soft whoomp as they hit the snowdrift below. He looked down, 20 feet, a dark drop, but the snow was deep. He heard shouting from the front. "They're in there! Listen to 'em fry!" It was Brody's voice, cracked and full of a terrible, blind glee. "Hold on," he whispered to May. He lifted her again. He could not jump with her. It would kill them both. He sat on the edge of the burning sill, his legs dangling, the wood hot enough to blister his hands. He lowered her as far as his arms could reach. She was a dead weight. He held her by the armpits, her body hanging in the night air. "I'm letting go, May," he said. He released his grip. She fell, a silent, dark shape, and vanished into the drift. Cal swung his legs back in, grabbed the sill, and pushed off, vaulting himself out and away from the building, trying to clear the foundation. He hit the snow hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. The barn collapsed behind him. It did not fall slowly, it imploded, a massive, roaring column of red and gold that lit the entire valley, casting the cabin and the trees in a flickering, hellish light. The sound was a physical punch. He lay in the snow, gasping, the heat of the fire on his back. He heard a hoarse whinny, a terrible, high-pitched scream. Cut short. He closed his eyes. Grit. Molly. He pushed the thought away. He crawled to where May had fallen. She was lying still. May. A shot cracked through the night. The bullet snapped past his head, so close he felt its wind, and buried itself in a pine tree behind him. Instinct. He did not think. He grabbed May by the coat and dragged her, pulling her behind a large, fallen log that marked the edge of the clearing. The snow here was deep, the log a solid, dark barrier. "Stay down," he ordered, though she was still barely conscious. He looked back. The thin man, the one May had shot in the leg, was staggering near the cabin. He was not wounded badly. He was reloading his rifle, the light of the burning barn dancing on his face. He was the one who had lit the fire. Cal grabbed his own rifle, the one he had thrown from the loft. He levered around into the chamber and rested the barrel on the log. "Got you now, Walker," the man yelled, his voice thin and reedy. He raised his rifle. Cal fired. The man fired. The shots were almost simultaneous. The man's bullet was wild, thudding into the log, sending splinters into Cal's face. Cal's shot was true. He saw the man jolt, drop his rifle, and look down at his chest in surprise. But the man was not alone. Cal had forgotten the third rider, the one he had tackled in the cabin. The man stepped out from the side of the cabin, leveling his own rifle. Cal tried to swing his rifle, to chamber another round. He was too slow. He felt a sledgehammer hit his left shoulder, a white-hot, tearing pain that dropped him to his knees. His rifle fell from his numb fingers into the snow. "Cal!" May's voice. She was awake. He fell forward, clutching his shoulder. The blood was hot, gushing between his fingers. He looked up. The third rider was advancing, walking slowly across the clearing, his rifle aimed at Cal's head. He had a grim smile on his face. "That's one for Amos," the man said, referring to the thin man May had shot. He was 10 yards away. He stopped, taking careful aim. Cal reached for his revolver, but his left arm was dead, and his right was trapped under him. He was finished. A small, sharp crack. It was not the sound of a rifle. It was the sound of a small-caliber pistol. The rider stopped. He looked confused. He looked down. At his stomach, a small, dark stain was spreading on his shirt. He looked over, toward the log. May was on her knees, her small pistol held in both hands. her arms resting on the log, her face a mask of cold, white fury. She had reloaded it in the loft. The man tried to raise his rifle. May fired again. The man fell backward, his rifle discharging into the sky. He lay still in the mud and snow. Silence. The only sounds were the roar of the fire and the sudden, terrible, sobbing screams of Brody, who was still on the cabin porch, blind and alone. Cal. May was at his side, her hands on his face. Cal, you are bleeding. Shoulder, he grunted, the pain washing over him in waves. It's all right. We have to stop it. She ripped a piece of her own shirt, wadding it up, pressing it hard against the wound. He cried out, a sharp, choked sound. Brody, he managed, looking toward the cabin. But new sounds were cutting through the night. Horses, riders, more than one. Damn you all! Brody was screaming, fumbling for his horse. I'll kill you! I'll kill you all! Put that gun down, Brody, a new voice yelled, a familiar voice. Or I'll put you down. Jebediah Stone rode into the clearing, his rifle leveled. Behind him were two other ranchers, men Cal recognized from cattle drives, their faces grim in the firelight. Brody, hearing a voice he recognized, panicked. He found his horse, clawed his way into the saddle, and spurred the animal, blind, into the trees. He rode with the reckless terror of a man who knew he was finished. Jeb lowered his rifle. Let him go. The wolves will have him by morning. He dismounted and ran to Cal's side, his old, worn face etched with worry. Calvin! My God! We saw the fire from the ridge. We knew it was you. Jeb! Cal gasped. They... We know, Jeb said, his voice hard. Henry, get that wagon. We found it down the road. Must have been theirs. We'll get him in it, ma'am. Are you the one? May looked up, her face smeared with soot and Cal's blood. My name is May. Lord have mercy, Jeb said. He looked at the two dead men, then at the burning ruins of the barn. This is Judge's business, and it's gone too far. Henry, one of the other ranchers, rode up. Jeb, he's here. Who's here? Judge Harden, the circuit man. We found him on the road, on his way to town. We told him there was a war brewing at Walker's place. He's coming. A fourth man rode into the clearing, this one on a tall, black horse. He was an older man, upright in the saddle, with a square, white beard. He wore a long coat and a flat-brimmed hat. He looked at the fire, the dead men, and the small group huddled around the wounded Cal. What, in the name of God, has happened here? Judge Harden's voice was a deep, authoritative boom. They moved Cal into the cabin. The fire from the barn had shattered the windows and scorched the front wall, but it was standing. May, her hands steady now, tore strips from a sheet for bandages, packing the wound as Jeb held a lantern. Judge Harden sat at Cal's small table, his face a mask of stone. He had listened. He had listened to May, whose voice never wavered. She told him of the marriage, the debt, the death of her child, the beatings. She told him of the poster, the robbery lie, and the attack. Jeb Stone spoke next. He told the judge what he knew of Cal's brother, Elias. He told him of the town's fear of Judge Abernathy. He told him that Brody was a known thug, given a badge to do the judge's dirty work. Judge Harden was silent for a long time, tapping his fingers on the table. Ma'am, he said, finally looking at May. You say this marriage, it was performed by Judge Abernathy? Yes, sir, in his study. Was there a witness? Only his son, Elias, and my father, who was not in his right mind. He was broken, sir. Was a certificate filed with the territorial office? I do not know, sir. It was not. Henry, the other rancher, said he was a small, quiet man who read books. I checked the registry in town. I have an interest in records. There is no record of a marriage between Elias Abernathy and May. What was your family name, ma'am? Hale, she whispered. No marriage for a May Hale, not in the last year. Judge Hardin nodded, his face grim. A marriage performed by the father of the groom, with no lawful witness and no certificate filed. It is not a marriage. It is a coercion. The man had no legal claim on you, ma'am, none at all. He looked at the dead men outside. These men, they were not deputies. They were bounty hunters, acting on a false claim. What happened here? This was not murder. This was self-defense. He pulled a piece of paper and a pen from his bag. I am drafting a statement, he said, his pen scratching in the quiet cabin. It will attest that you, May Hale, are a free woman, that the bounty posted by Elias Abernathy is fraudulent and void. I will sign it. Mr. Stone, you will sign it. Mr. Walker, can you sign? Cal, pale and sweating, was propped against the wall. He nodded. I'll sign. It's done. Then, Hardin said, the law, the real law, will see you as free. He stood up, putting his hat on. But this paper, it is not a shield. He looked at May, his eyes full of a sad, hard wisdom. It is a piece of paper. Judge Abernathy, he is a powerful man. He will not take this well. The town, they rely on him. They will not thank you for this. This document makes you legal. It does not make you safe. Jeb nodded. He's right. May, the town, it'll be cold, colder than the storm. Judge Hardin and the ranchers left as the sun was beginning to rise. They took the bodies of the two men with them, draped over their saddles. May and Cal were alone. The cabin was a wreck. The windows were shattered, the door was broken, and the floor was covered in mud and blood. Outside, the barn was a smoking, black ruin. The smell of burned horses was heavy in the air. May tended to the fire, her movements slow, mechanical. Cal sat, his arm in a sling, the pain a dull, heavy throb. They were free, but they had lost everything. He was right, May said, her voice dead. She was staring out the broken window at the ruin of the barn. It doesn't feel safe. Cal pushed himself to his feet, grunting with the effort. He walked to her, stood beside her. We're not staying, he said. She looked at him. But your land, this is your home. It's a box, he said, his voice rough. It's a place I came to hide. I'm done hiding. He looked at her, his eyes clear, despite the pain. Let's not wait for justice. That ain't what that paper is. It's just a truce. Let's make our own place. She stared at him, the first flicker of, not hope, but life, returning to her eyes. Where? Montana, he said, like we planned. We'll just have to walk. A slow, small smile touched her lips. I can walk. They spent the morning gathering what was left. Not much. The saddlebags he had thrown from the window. Some jerky, some coffee, his revolver, her pistol, the clothes on their backs. As Cal was securing the cabin, May walked back inside. She went to the corner where, weeks ago, he had thrown her old, frozen clothes. The cabin was a mess, but the bundle was still there, untouched. She pulled out the ruined, stiff bodice of her dress, the one he had cut from her back, and tangled with it. The tattered, frozen remains of her shoes. They were not shoes, not really, just thin leather slippers, the kind a housewoman would wear, now frozen, torn, and caked with the mud of her escape. They were the last pieces of that life. She took them. She carried them, one in each hand, out of the cabin. She walked past the smoking barn, down to the small creek that was now running fast and clear with snowmelt. She built a small fire on the bank, using twigs and dry leaves. She laid the stiff corset on the flames. She watched the fabric blacken and curl. She watched the stays warp in the heat. Then she added the shoes. They smoked, sizzled, and finally caught. She stood there, barefoot in the mud, watching the last symbols of her prison turn to ash. When it was done, she stirred the ashes, scattered them, and watched the creek carry them away. She turned. Cal was standing behind her. He had his one good arm outstretched. In his hand, he held his oldest, warmest coat, the sheepskin-lined one. She said nothing. She just walked to him and let him wrap it around her. He pulled the collar up around her neck, his rough fingers brushing her chin. "It's time to go," he said. She nodded. He kept his arm around her. They did not look back. They turned north, toward the high pass, and began to walk. They walked north. They did not look back. The world behind them was a column of black smoke against a pale, bruised dawn. The world in front was a sea of sucking mud and half-frozen slush. They had one rifle, 2 pistols, a bag of dried meat, and a piece of paper signed by a traveling judge. They had no horses, no shelter, and no plan beyond the name of a valley in a different territory. Cal Van Walker walked with his teeth gritted, his left arm bound tight to his chest. The bullet had gone clean through the meat of his shoulder, but the pain was a living, breathing thing. It radiated down his back and up his neck. With every step, the jolt was a fresh betrayal. May Hale walked beside him, barefoot. She had wrapped her feet in strips of oilcloth from the saddlebag, but the icy water of the snowmelt soaked through in minutes. She had Cal's heavy sheepskin coat on, the one he had wrapped her in by the creek. It swallowed her whole, its weight a comfort, its warmth a small fortress. They did not talk. The first day was a trial of silence and endurance. They had to cross the Devil's Tooth Pass before more riders came. Brody was out there, blind and lost. But Judge Abernathy was not. He had other men. The paper May carried was legal, but it was not a bulletproof vest. The pass was a high, windy place of shattered rock and deep, treacherous snow. The thaw had not reached this high. Cal, weak from blood loss, began to stumble. A fever was setting in, a hot, glassy look in his eyes. May, who had leaned on him for weeks, became his crutch. She put his good arm over her shoulder, bracing herself against his weight. He was a big man, and she was small, but she did not falter. She kicked steps into the hard-packed snow for her own wrapped feet, her face set in a grim, determined mask. I can walk," he grunted, trying to pull away. "Be quiet, Cal," she ordered, her voice firm. "And lean. We are not stopping here." They made it over the crest as the sun was setting, the world below them a vast, dark, and unknown territory. They were in Montana. They collapsed into a hollow of pines, out of the wind. May built a small, smokeless fire. She unwrapped his bandage. The wound was angry, a swollen, purple-red. "I need whiskey," she said. "Saddlebag," he whispered, his eyes closed. She found a small flask, half full. She tore a fresh strip from her own shirt, soaked it, and pressed it to the wound. He did not cry out, but his whole body went rigid, a long, strangled hiss escaping his lips. She cleaned it, her hands surprisingly gentle, but firm. She packed it with the last of their clean rags. "You have to drink," she said, holding a cup of melted snow to his lips. He drank. He looked at her, his eyes clouded with pain. You should have left me, should have run." "And where would I go, Cal?" she asked, her voice soft. "There is nowhere to go alone. We know that. Now sleep." She sat up all night, the rifle across her lap, watching the pass behind them. She fed the fire stick by stick, keeping him warm. She saw the irony. He had pulled her from the snow, and now she was keeping him from the cold. They stayed there 2 days, until his fever broke. They moved on, following the new creeks, heading northwest. They walked for a week. They ate the last of the jerky. The hunger was a dull ache, but they were used to aches. They came, finally, to a small settlement. It was not a town. It was a cluster of cabins around a trading post and a muddy crossroads. It was called, simply, Parker's Fork. People stared. They were a hard-looking pair. A gaunt, limping man with his arm in a sling, and a small woman in a man's giant coat, her feet wrapped in rags. They had $3, which Cal had kept in his boot. "We need food," May said, her voice low. And proper shoes. For me." "I can work," Cal said. He stood straighter, trying to hide the pain. "You can rest," she said. She looked at the trading post. A woman was sweeping the porch, a tired-looking woman in a gray dress. 2 small, dirty-faced children hiding behind her skirts. "Wait here," May said. She walked up to the woman. Cal watched. He saw May talk, her hands moving, pointing. The woman on the porch shook her head. May kept talking. She pointed at the children. The woman hesitated, then, with a sigh, nodded and pointed toward a wood pile. May came back. "She is a widow. Her name is Sarah. She said you can sleep in her barn, if you will chop wood." "Chop?" Cal looked at his useless left arm. "I will help," May said. "And I made a trade. She has children. They do not know their letters. I told her I could teach them, for 2 hours a day. She will give us stew and a place to sleep." Cal stared at her. "You teach?" "I can read," May said, a flicker of her old pride. "My mother taught me. I will teach them." And so, their new life began. Cal, using only his right arm, stubbornly split firewood. It was slow, agonizing work, but he did it. He chopped. He stacked. He earned their place in the hayloft. May sat on the porch of the trading post with the 2 small children, a piece of charcoal in her hand and a flat piece of slate. "This," she said, her voice soft, "is an A. It is for apple and for Abernathy, but we will use apple." She taught them, and in the evening, the widow, Sarah, brought them a bucket of hot, thick stew. It was the best food Cal had ever tasted. They ate, sitting in the hay, the smell of horses around them. It was not the smell of fire. It was the smell of life. They stayed in Parker's Fork for a month. Cal's shoulder began to heal. The muscles were torn, but he was strong. He began to take on other work. He found a rancher who needed fences built. He could not dig post holes easily, but he could string wire. He worked from sunup to sundown. May continued to teach. The widow paid her $1 a week, and May, with her own money, went into the trading post and bought a pair of sturdy, leather work boots. She bought needles and thread. She took Cal's ruined, burnt coat, and she mended it. She took his spare shirt and she patched it. They slept in the hayloft. They did not sleep in the same bed. They slept near but separate. The intimacy of the burning barn was a thing of fire and fear, too raw to be examined in this new, quiet life. They were partners. They were friends. It was enough. When they left, they had $40, 2 pairs of good boots, and a sway-backed mule to carry their supplies. The widow, Sarah, cried. Her children gave May a small, polished rock. They moved north. Spring had come, and the land was a riot of green. The high plains of Wyoming were a distant, gray memory. This was a land of trees, of wide, fast rivers, of mountains that did not menace, but protected. They fell into a rhythm. They would walk, the mule plodding behind them. They would camp under the stars. The sky was vast, and it was not empty. It was filled with promise. They talked, not of the past, not of Brody or the judge or the fire. They talked of the future. One night, sitting by a fire near a river, Cal was sharpening his knife. "We need a place," he said, his voice quiet. A permanent place, before winter." "Yes," May said. She was braiding her hair, which was growing long and healthy. "I know cattle," he said. I could start again. A small ranch." May was silent for a long time. She looked at the fire. "A ranch is good. It is isolated." "That is what I like," he said. "I know," she said, smiling. "But I was thinking, in that town, Parker's Fork, so many people moving through, all heading west. They looked as tired as we did. They needed a place." "A place?" "An inn," she said. "Or a roadhouse. Not a big one, just a cabin, with a few extra rooms, a warm meal, a safe bed. We could build it, near a river, on a main road." Cal stopped sharpening his knife. "An inn, May, that is, people, strangers, every night." "Yes," she said. I am not good with people," he said, his voice rough. She looked at him, her eyes clear and steady in the firelight. "You were good with me." He had no answer for that. He looked down at the knife in his hand. "A place," she said, her voice soft, full of a dream she was just finding. "Where no one is turned away at the door, no matter what, no matter who is chasing them. A place to rest, a real one." He thought of her, small and frozen, collapsing on his porch, begging for water. He thought of her asking, "Where will I sleep?" He nodded. Slowly. "A place to rest, I like the sound of that." They moved on. They worked in another town, this time a larger one. Cal worked for a freight company, loading and unloading wagons. His shoulder was strong now, the scar a puckered, angry knot. May found work as a seamstress. She was good with her hands. She was patient. They saved, they bought a second mule. They bought tools, an axe, a hammer, a saw. They were not running. They were building. Summer turned to a cool, crisp autumn. They were deep in the territory, following the rivers. They had been traveling for 5 months. They were no longer the gaunt, haunted figures who had fled Wyoming. Cal had gained his weight back. May's face had color, and she had learned, finally, to laugh. It was a quiet sound, but it was real. They were a team. He chopped the wood. She made the fire. He hunted. She cooked. He cleaned the guns. She mended the clothes. At night, they slept side by side under the stars. They would hold hands, sometimes. In the dark, it was a simple, solid comfort. One night, a full moon lit the clearing. It was cold, the first real bite of the coming winter. They were camped beneath a massive pine tree. Cal was asleep, or pretending to be. May was sitting up, watching the moon. He heard her, a small sound, a hitched breath, a stifled sob. He sat up. "May?" She did not turn. It is a silly night. The moon is so bright." He moved, sitting beside her, not touching. "What is it?" I still see him," she whispered. Her voice was not the voice of the capable woman he knew. It was the small, broken voice from the cabin. "Thomas, my baby." She turned to him, her eyes wide and wet with moonlight. "I dream of him. I dream I am holding him, and he is warm, and then I wake up, and my arms they are just empty. It hurts. Cal." She was not crying. She was just stating a fact, a cold, hard fact. I know he is gone," she whispered. I miss him. I miss him so much. And I could not even protect him." Cal Van Walker did not have the words. He did not know how to fix this. He did not know how to heal this. It was a wound far deeper than the one in his shoulder. So he did not speak. He just moved. He opened his arms. He pulled her against his chest, his good side, and he held her. He wrapped his arms tight around her, his hand cradling the back of her head, pressing her face into his shirt. She held on to him, her fingers clutching his coat, and for the first time, she truly cried for her son. Not the silent, terrified tears of Wyoming, but the loud, raw, grieving sobs of a mother. Cal said nothing. He just held her. He silently rocked her by the light of the moon. He was her anchor. He was the wall. He was the one who did not run. They reached the Bitterroot Valley as the first snows of the next winter began to dust the high peaks. The valley was just as he remembered it from his childhood. A vast, green sanctuary, protected on all sides by mountains. The river was wide and clear. "This is it," he said, his voice thick. It took them a week to find the cabin. His uncle had been a trapper, a man even more isolated than Cal. The cabin was high up, near a creek, almost invisible, choked by 20 years of undergrowth. It was a ruin. The roof was gone. One wall had collapsed. "It is not much," Cal said, his heart sinking. May walked around it. She touched the stone chimney. It was solid. She looked at the foundation. It was square. She looked at the view, down the valley. "It is perfect," she said, a smile on her face. It has good bones. We have tools." They worked. They worked harder than they had ever worked. They lived in a canvas tent they had bought, and from sunup to sundown, they built their home. Cal, with his axe, was a force of nature. He felled trees, hewed logs, his body finding the rhythm of the work. May was the builder. She learned to mix mud and grass for chinking. She learned to use the saw, her small, capable hands cutting boards for the new roof. They worked as a team. They laughed. They argued over where a window should go. They got blisters. They grew strong. By the time the real snow came, they had a home. It was one room, but it was tight. The chimney drew true. They had a roof that did not leak. They had a door that could be barred. They had 2 horses, bought with their savings. They had chickens in a small coop. They had a small, fenced-in garden, sleeping under the snow, ready for spring. One night, the first heavy snow of the season fell. It was not a blizzard. It was a quiet, gentle fall, a white blanket settling over the valley. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled in the hearth. It was warm. It was safe. Cal was already in the bed they had built, a wide, solid frame of pine, piled high with blankets and a mattress stuffed with dry grass and feathers. He was reading, slowly, from a book May had bought. May came in from outside. She had been checking on the horses. She brushed the snow from her shoulders, her cheeks red from the cold. She was wearing a dress, one she had made herself from blue wool. She moved quietly across the room, undressing in the warm firelight. She was no longer the gaunt, haunted creature. She was a woman, strong, whole. She stopped in the doorway of the small sleeping alcove they had built. Cal looked up from his book. The firelight played on his face, softening the hard lines, the scar on his shoulder. She looked at him. A small, soft smile touched her lips. It was a memory, a ritual, a question. "Where will I sleep?" she asked, her voice a quiet murmur. Calvin Walker did not hesitate. He was not awkward. He was not fumbling. He was home. He smiled, a slow, sure smile that reached his eyes. He already had the blanket pulled back, his arm holding the space open. "Right here," he said, his voice low and soft. "As long as you will have me." She went to him, sliding under the warm covers, into the space that was waiting for her. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. Outside, the snow fell, blanketing the valley, the mountains, the entire world, but inside the small cabin, there was no wind, there was no fear, There was only the sound of the fire and the slow, steady breathing of two people, once broken by the world, now whole in the silence of a shared bed, far from everything that had ever hurt them. Thank you for listening to our story. We invite you to comment below with where you are listening from to connect with fellow fans. Subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts.